To town for trouble. He'd come for supplies. But trouble had a way of finding him in places like this. A crowd had gathered in the middle of the street, their laughter and whispers carried in the still, hot air. Samuel moved closer, curiosity pulling him toward the rough wooden platform someone had turned into an auction stand. What he saw there made his stomach tighten. A woman stood on the platform with chains around her wrists. She couldn't have been more than 23. Her tangled auburn hair caught the dying sunlight like copper fire, and her torn dress told the story of a struggle she hadn't won. Dried blood marked the corner of her mouth and bruises darkened her arms, yet her back was straight, her chin lifted high, and her amber eyes burned with fury instead of fear. The auctioneer, a greasy man named Josiah Pritchard, waved his hat for attention. "Gentlemen," he called, "what we have here is a genuine wild creature, found livin' like an animal in the canyons, stealin', fightin', and scratchin' like a demon. The county's washin' its hands of her. Whoever takes her does so at his own risk." The crowd buzzed with excitement and crude jokes. Some men laughed, others spat tobacco juice into the dirt. A few women gasped and whispered behind gloved hands. Someone shouted, "What's her name?" "Calls herself Elena," Pritchard said, grinning. "Don't know if that's Christian or heathen. Don't talk much unless it's to curse. But she's strong, gentlemen, strong as a wild Mustang." Quote, "She ain't no horse," Elena's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack, "and I'll kill any man who tries to break me." The laughter faltered. A hush spread through the crowd. Samuel's eyes met hers for the first time, and something flashed between them. Not pity, not fear, but recognition. She looked like someone who'd fought the world and refused to bow. Now, Pritchard said, sweating through his vest. "No need for dramatics. Let's start the bidding." $20! $25! Someone called. $30! Shouted another. $40! Bellowed Bull Morrison, a heavyset rancher with drink-red cheeks. "I'll take her. Got a place for spirited fillies." Laughter erupted. Elena spat toward him, earning a sharp backhand from a deputy. She staggered, blood fresh on her lip, but her glare didn't waver. Samuel's jaw tightened. The scene made something old and angry rise in his chest. He hadn't planned to get involved, but watching the fire in her eyes dim under the crowd's cruelty, that he couldn't stomach. "45, Morrison crowed. "50, another man jeered. Before Samuel realized he'd moved, he was stepping up onto the platform. The crowd parted, murmuring. 100, he said quietly. The words dropped like stones into still water. Pritchard froze, blinking. 100? "You heard me," Samuel said, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. "Cash ended now." Morrison's face twisted. "You can't just—" Samuel turned his cold gray stare on him. "Unless you plan to bid higher." Morrison's hand twitched near his gun, but one look at Samuel's steady stance and the hand resting near his own Colt changed his mind. He spat into the dirt. "She's all yours, Hayes. No man can tame her anyway." The crowd erupted in whispers. Samuel handed over the money, ignoring them all. Someone called out, "What you planning to do with her, Hayes? Your ranch ain't no place for a woman." Samuel's voice was calm but firm. "What I do on my land is my business." Then he looked at Elena and added softly, "Unlock her." The deputy hesitated. "She'll bolt." "Unlock her," Samuel repeated. The chains fell away with a heavy clatter. Elena rubbed her raw wrists, never looking away from him. "You bought nothing," she said, her voice hoarse but strong. "I'm no man's property." "Never said you were," Samuel replied, "but right now, getting you away from this crowd seems the best of bad options. You come peaceful, or you stay here with them." He nodded toward Morrison and the others. Elena's jaw tightened. Pride fought with reason in her eyes. Finally, she gave a sharp nod. "I'll come, but I won't kneel." "Never asked you to," Samuel said. "Wagons this way." They walked through the parted crowd, whispers chasing them like ghosts. Elena held her head high, even without the chains, walking beside him, not behind. At his wagon, Samuel paused. "Can you ride?" "Better than any man here," she said flatly. He almost smiled. good. There's a mare tied behind. She's yours for the journey." As she mounted, an old woman's voice called from the crowd, "You're making a mistake, Samuel Hayes." That wildness can't be loved out of a person. Quote, Samuel swung into his saddle beside Elena. "Not trying to love it out," he said. "Maybe it doesn't need to come out at all." Together they rode out of Willow Creek as the sun dropped below the horizon, the sky bleeding red and gold behind them. Two shadows stretched long across the road, a weary rancher and a wild woman with eyes like fire, leaving behind a town full of gossip, judgment, and cruelty. Samuel didn't look back, neither did she. Ahead lay miles of open desert, a long road to his ranch, and an uncertain future neither could yet name. But for the first time in years, Samuel Hayes felt something stir inside him, a quiet, dangerous feeling he hadn't known since before the war: hope. The road stretched long and lonely beneath the silver light of the moon. 3 hours had passed since they left Willow Creek, and neither Samuel nor Elena had spoken a word. The desert night was cool, the wind dry and thin, carrying the distant cry of coyotes across the open land. Elena rode beside him, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon. She handled the mare like she'd been born in a saddle, every movement easy and natural. Samuel watched her from the corner of his eye, careful not to make it obvious. She was still a mystery. All fire and silence, a woman shaped by hardship yet unbroken by it. "We'll camp soon," Samuel said finally, his voice low. Elena gave no reply. She didn't even glance at him. He wasn't surprised. After what she'd been through, words were cheap. He rode on, guiding them toward a small grove of cottonwoods clustered around a spring, one of the few safe resting spots between Willow Creek and his ranch. When they arrived, Samuel dismounted and loosened his saddle. "This is safe ground," he said, nodding toward the water and the trees. "We'll rest here tonight." "And if I keep riding?" she asked quietly. Her tone wasn't a threat, it was a test. He looked at her over his shoulder. "Then you'll ride into the desert and die of thirst before morning. But that's your choice." She studied him for a long moment, then dismounted without another word. Samuel built a small fire, his movements steady and calm. He'd learned that sometimes silence built trust faster than talk. The flames soon flickered to life, casting warm light across the camp. He laid out 2 bedrolls, one on each side of the fire, and placed his rifle within easy reach. From his saddlebag, he pulled a strip of jerky and a can of peaches. "Hungry?" he asked. Elena hesitated, then nodded. He handed her the food without looking at her directly. She snatched it and retreated to her side of the fire, eating like someone who'd gone too long without a meal. "Why?" she said suddenly, her voice rough from disuse. "Why did you buy me?" Samuel looked into the flames for a long time before answering. Couldn't stand to watch it anymore, he said simply. "What they were doing to you. What they would have done after." Her eyes narrowed. "Every man wants something." "True enough," he admitted. "I want my ranch to survive the winter. I want a good night's sleep without ghosts chasing me. But none of that means taking something that isn't mine." Quote. She watched him in silence, studying his face like she was searching for the lie. The firelight softened the hard lines of his features, revealing the quiet steadiness beneath. "And if I run?" she asked finally. "Then you run," he said. "I won't chase you. Just remember, the desert doesn't care about freedom. It'll kill you just as quick as any man might." The wind picked up, stirring the flames. Elena wrapped the thin blanket he'd given her tighter around her shoulders. "What's your ranch like?" she asked, almost reluctantly. "Hard land," he replied. 30 acres of dry ground and stubborn cattle. But there's good water and solid walls. Got 3 hands who help me keep it running. Tom, Miguel, and a boy named Billy. "They'll expect me to serve them," she said bitterly. "They'll expect you to work," Samuel said. "Same as everyone else. No more, no less." For a long time, the only sounds were the crackling fire and the whisper of the wind in the cottonwoods. Then, quietly, Elena said, "I've never had a home." Samuel didn't look up. Maybe this one will be dialed, she murmured, staring into the flames, like an animal. But I wasn't always. Her voice trembled for the first time. They caught me stealing food. I was hungry, that's all. No shame in hunger, Samuel said softly. They made it shameful, she whispered. Made me shameful, she shook her head. They called me untamed because I wouldn't bend, because I wouldn't let them own me. A coyote howled in the distance. Elena tilted her head slightly, listening with something like longing. You understand them, Samuel said. Her gaze flicked toward him. Better than I understand people. He nodded once. Coyotes survive. So do you. She didn't answer, but her shoulders seemed to ease a little. The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It was shared. When the fire began to fade, Samuel stood and stretched. I'll take first watch, he said. You get some sleep. You don't trust me, she said. I trust you enough to sleep on the other side of that fire, he replied evenly. And I trust myself enough to wake up if you try anything. Quote. Something flickered in her eyes. Maybe amusement, maybe respect. She curled up on the bedroll, still alert, even as exhaustion took her. Samuel sat beneath the cottonwood, rifle across his knees, watching the stars. He told himself he'd acted out of decency, that he'd bought her freedom because it was the right thing to do. But deep down he knew there was more to it. Something about her fierce pride had stirred a part of him he thought had long since turned to stone. Near dawn, Elena stirred, gasping softly, as if from a bad dream. Samuel didn't move. Nightmares? He asked quietly. Always, she whispered, wrapping her arms around her knees. Morning'll chase them off, he said. Sun's good for that. As the first light touched the desert, she stood and began to pack her things without being asked. For the first time, Samuel smiled faintly. About what you said in town, she began, tightening the saddle straps on her mare. That thing about me riding into your heart. Did you mean it? Quote, Samuel looked at her, his expression unreadable. I meant it as a joke, he said. Then, after a pause, but maybe there was some truth in it, too. Elena looked away, her lips pressed together. I still might run, she said quietly. I know, he replied, climbing into his own saddle. But you're here now. That's something. They rode out side by side, the sunrise painting the desert in gold. Behind them lay a town that would talk about them for years. Ahead lay a ranch full of hard work and harder truths. For now, though, there was only the sound of hooves on dry earth, and the faint, unspoken promise of something neither of them dared name. 2 days later, the Triple Creek Ranch came into view, a spread of weathered wood and fenced pastures, lying quiet beneath the wide Arizona sky. From the ridge above it, the land looked endless, hard, honest. Samuel felt that familiar mix of pride and fatigue settle over him. Lena rode beside him in silence, her eyes scanning everything. The barn, the corrals, the smoke rising from the chimney. Her jaw tightened, her hands gripping the reins. To her, it wasn't a home yet. It looked too much like every cage she'd ever escaped. There it is, Samuel said, nodding toward the valley. It ain't much, but it's what I've got. It's solid, she said carefully. He smiled faintly. That it is. When they rode into the yard, 3 men came out to meet them. Tom Brennan, the gray-bearded foreman, wiped his hands on his trousers and raised his brows. Boss, he said, weren't expecting company. This is Elena, Samuel said. She'll be staying on. Working same as the rest of us. Tom's expression didn't change. He tipped his hat. Ma'am? The others followed his lead. Miguel, older than the desert itself, gave a polite nod. Billy, barely 18 and all curiosity, grinned too wide until Tom shot him a look that shut it down fast. Samuel dismounted and turned to Elena. You'll bunk in the small room off the kitchen. Has its own door to the outside. Figured you'd want that. Her eyes flicked toward him, surprised by the thoughtfulness. And what's expected of me? Work, he said simply. Same as everyone else. Quote, over the next few days, the ranch settled into its rhythm, sunrise to sunset, work until your bones ached, meals shared in quiet satisfaction. Elena moved through it like someone testing the edges of a new life. She woke before dawn, worked hard, spoke little. At first, she avoided the others, eating at the far end of the table, sleeping with her door locked tight. But the men didn't push her. Miguel offered quiet kindness. Tom gave clear instructions without judgment. Even Billy learned when to leave her be. One morning, Tom found her by the well, watching the sunrise. "Breakfast's ready," he said. "I'm not hungry," she replied. He nodded. "Suit yourself. But pride makes a poor meal." Then he walked away. By noon, she was sitting at the table. The work tested her in ways the wilderness never had. There were chores she didn't know: cooking, mending, laundry. The first time she ruined a pot of beans, she threw the spoon across the room in frustration. Miguel only chuckled. "Patience, señorita," he said. Food and horses. Both need gentle hands. Quote, later that week, when a sandstorm came roaring across the valley, Elena was out in the far pasture with Tom, learning to mend fences. The wind turned fierce without warning, whipping grit into her eyes. She panicked, broke free of Tom's grasp, and ran blind into the storm. Samuel found her, an hour later, half buried against a rock outcrop, shivering and raw from the sand. He wrapped his coat around her and half carried her back. Tom was waiting, angry and worried. "You could have died out there." "I didn't ask for help," Elena snapped through chattering teeth. Samuel spoke quietly. "No, you didn't, but you needed it anyway. There's no shame in that." She stared at him, searching for mockery, but found none. The words sank deeper than she'd admit. Days turned into weeks, and something began to shift. Elena learned to work the ranch the same way she'd once learned to survive the wild, through trial, error, and fierce determination. She drove cattle, mended fences, and cooked her share of meals. Her hands blistered, her arms bruised, but she never complained. The horses seemed to sense something kindred in her. When Billy struggled to break a restless young Mustang, Elena finally stepped in. "You're doing it wrong," she said flatly. Billy bristled. "Like you could do better." Without another word, she vaulted the fence, approached the trembling horse, and whispered softly in a language of calm and rhythm. Within minutes, the animal stood still, breathing hard but unafraid. "Fear makes everything wild," she said quietly, stroking its neck. Samuel, watching from the barn, felt her words settle deep inside him. That night, she joined them at the main table instead of sitting apart. She didn't say much, but she smiled once. A small, uncertain curve of the lips that lit her whole face. Samuel caught the moment, stored it like a treasure. When the dishes were cleared, she stayed behind to help him wash up. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" he asked. "For giving me work instead of walls." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw that the fire in her eyes had changed. It wasn't only defiance now, it was belonging. "Everyone needs something to build," he said. "Otherwise, we're just surviving." She handed him a clean plate. "And what are we building, Samuel Hayes?" He met her gaze, steady and sure, maybe something worth keeping. Outside, a coyote called to the moon. Elena didn't turn toward the sound this time. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the urge to run. That night, when the lamps went dark, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mother's old name echoing softly in her mind. Elena